Welcome to the United Church of Strafford, Vermont on this second Sunday after Epiphany and Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday. Epiphany comes from a Greek word that means to reveal. During Epiphany, we look for revelations of the light of God made manifest in Jesus and in the world. And today we're celebrating it in the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Central to King's message, though, is that the light of God's love is in us all. King said, "It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of humanity." King called us to create the realm of God's love on earth, what he called the beloved community. Every time we gather, we have the opportunity to do that. So please reach out today and extend your loving care to all who are with us. We may be on Zoom in our separate boxes, but we can still be one. In fact, during the hardest times of this pandemic, when we have been forced apart, we have felt more one than ever through our love. Someone lovingly called me naive in the Heartfulness Circle on Thursday when I expressed my hope that humanity will wake up in time to change our disastrous course and choose instead the path that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. envisioned. He saw that our only hope was to evolve to a new consciousness where we could see our true oneness and undergo a revolution of values and change our harmful way of living on earth. Millions of people around the world today share King's vision and are working hard to transform human civilization. We are in a race to see whether oneness or dividedness will win. And the fate of the earth hangs on the outcome. The person who called me naive later in the conversation recalled the words of William Sloane Coffin, who said, "Hope is a state of mind independent of the state of the world." If your heart's full of hope, you can be persistent when you can't be optimistic. You can keep the faith despite the evidence, knowing that only in so doing has the evidence any chance of changing. So while I'm not optimistic, I'm always very hopeful, Bill said. Well, today I invite you to hope and to persist and keep your mind stayed on your hope's source and goal as we worship together. So as we begin our children's time, I remember that the children recited excerpts from King's I Have a Dream speech at the end of the last Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday that we were in the sanctuary. And then we met after worship to talk about how we could fulfill our vision and work for justice as a congregation. The year before that, I remember I played a game with the children, and I asked them to name all the ways that we are different. Things like gender, age, hair color, tastes. And it seemed to them after they brainstormed some that we're really very different. And then I asked them to name what we all have in common. And they listed things like we all have bodies, we all breathe air, we eat food, we have hearts that pump and hearts that love, and we think, we feel, we want life to be good, we want to be part of a loving community. They came up with this long list. And then I told them that was just the beginning. What we can't see is, but science has told us, is that we share invisible particles that move through us, and it's in you one minute, and then it's in me the next. They go back and forth, and also that our brains have something called Gandhi neurons. Scientists have discovered that when you cry, my brain, looking at you, my brain will respond as if I am crying. That part of my brain that goes off when I cry will become active. So as Bill Coffin was fond of saying, we have far more in common than we have in conflict. And we are one in far more ways than we are not. And this is true with all the earth, not just us. Everything is made up of the same group of elements on earth. And at least half of the trillions of cells in our bodies are not us. They're not human, but they're microbes. They're tiny creatures inside us. And we could not live without them. And they could not live without us. And we all live on this one planet, and it seems big to us, but the nearest planet that we have found like ours is called Kepler 452b. That is really a lot like Earth. It would take 26 million years to reach in our fastest rocket today. So compared to the universe, every living being on Earth is part of one tight-knit family, sharing one small home. Jesus intuited this. He knew this. The Spirit helped him see it. And he prayed that we would live as one and love others as part of our own self. And he taught that path and he lived it. It's not always easy, but he assured us that the Spirit of God would help us. And there's something we can do to let go and empty ourselves of our sense of separation, of being a separate self, and open our hearts to the Spirit's help to see differently and be as loving and wise as Jesus. And it's prayer, of course. So we will pray together the Lord's Prayer now. The first letter of John, chapter 4, says that God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his life to establish the realm of God's love on earth. The forces that opposed King, the forces that he called racism, materialism, and militarism, the forces of fearful hate and self-centered greed, now threaten to destroy not only our form of democracy, but the conditions needed for life on earth. And those who honor a king can easily feel despair. So where is the path through this wilderness to the promised land that King assured us we would someday reach? And how can we rise like Jesus, full of the Spirit, fearlessly standing up to powerful oppressors, undaunted in our service of God's realm? Well, the fourth chapter of 1 John has a verse that I've struggled with, verse 18, and I think it can help answer these questions. The New Revised Standard Version translates it, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love." The King James Version says torment instead of punishment. And then the Message Bible, a contemporary translation, says fear is crippling. Torment, punishment, a crippling condition. You can see that others have struggled with that verse too. So I went back to the original Greek and kind of dug into the full connotations of the words. And what I came away with was this. Fear arises when we are on the wrong path, separated from God. So whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. They're not entirely on that loving path. Certainly it is a crippling torment or punishment to be on a path that is separate from God. The Tao Te Ching says, if I had any sense at all, my only fear would be of straying from the sacred way. And yet it is so easy to step off that path, even for a saint. Perfection of love, perfection in love is a moment-by-moment practice. The greatest Christian spiritual masters fall and get up, fall and get up, fall and get up. We can expect anxiety. We can expect fear or despair. They're just signs that we're alive and engaged and that we care. It's the next step we take through the fear or despair is what matters. The Reverend Dr. King knew this. He learned this. Remember the night of anguish he went through early in his career. His young wife and his new baby were home all day, receiving hate calls on the phone. He was being harassed by the police in Montgomery, and the white supremacist segregationists seemed to be getting only stronger, and his people were getting tired. King was exhausted himself and afraid for his family and beginning to despair. So he came home that night at midnight, and he prayed alone in the kitchen, telling God that he just couldn't go on. In the end, he sat there completely empty. And that's when a voice spoke to him, saying, "Get up, Martin. Keep speaking out boldly. Keep going, and I will be with you until the end." In the terms that I've been using recently in these services, King went through the kenosis of emptying and letting go, turning to God in prayer with nothing of his own self left. And that led to metanoia, to an expansion of his heart, mind, and soul, the ability to see differently and do what he could not have done otherwise. Moment to moment, continuous kenosis leads to continuous metanoia, and continuous metanoia leads to a continuous process of being perfected in love, in the situation at hand, in that moment. This path led King to say, "I'm not fearing any man," after 14 years of countless death threats and seeing his people be murdered. The path led him to expand his vision to the point where he saw clearly what humanity needs to do in order to survive. The Greek word for love in the first letter of John is agape. King wrote in his book Stride Toward Freedom that agape is the love of God operating in the human heart. Agape makes no distinction between friends and enemy. It is directed toward both. Agape is love seeking to preserve and create community. Agape is a willingness to go to any length to restore community. So King made this crucial connection between agape and koinonia, the Greek word for community built in love. The role of kenosis is to open us to metanoia. The role of metanoia is to open us to agape. And the role of agape is to open us to koinonia, preserving, creating, or restoring community, that we may all be one. King saw that this path was more than a personal spiritual journey. It was that, but it was more. He said that the Holy Spirit is the continuing, community-creating reality that moves through history. He who works against community is working against the whole of creation. Agape, King said, agape means a recognition of the fact that all life is interrelated, and all humanity is involved in a single process. There is a creative force in this universe that works to bring the disconnected aspects of reality into a harmonious whole, King said. And this is the promised land, life on earth as one harmonious whole. Attain oneness, and all our environmental crises are resolved and healed. Attain oneness, and all our wars and injustices come to an end. Attain oneness, and conservatives and progressives work together in mutual respect for the opposing role each plays in the harmony. Attain oneness, and human civilization could live sustainably on this planet for 1 billion years or more. King called for a revolution of values, a transformation of human consciousness, an evolution that he said would result in a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation. King said it was in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all people. He concluded, "This has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of humanity." We need to keep these words ringing in our ears. If we grow afraid, if we get lost, if we feel hopeless, no matter how many times we fall, we need to get up and step back on this path from the kenosis, where we each reduce ourselves to zero, to koinonia, where we are doing our part to create the loving community that is the absolute necessity for our survival, and keep recreating it and restoring it and do all we can to preserve it, because we fall in and out of it, but we need to keep on that path. And we each have our own way of walking this path. We have our own spiritual practices, our own gifts and resources to share, our own calling to a vocation and a form of action that our love will take. We have our own community and place to serve. Pooled together as a congregation and as a movement spanning millions of people like us around the world, we have the power to reach the promised land. So let us live in that hope, and let us take another step on the path now, practicing the kenosis of silent prayer, letting our thoughts go, letting our feelings be, and inviting the Spirit to expand the vision of our hearts so that our love grows and we may live as one. Let us pray. Amen.